Good afternoon. Sorry for this small problem. This is what happens when you trust technology to solve your problems. So I was introducing our guests and really thanking them for joining us in this roundtable. Antoni Ballabriga is Director of Responsible Business for BVA. Tony is a very good friend and Aspen alumni as a fellow of the First Movers program in Aspen, US. And he's a pioneer in Spain in this area of trying to help business become more sustainable and connect with very important social goals. Thank you, Tony.
Great pleasure.
And Hugo Dixon is also a dear friend. He's come from London. He's a writer, philosopher, a journalist, an activist. He has had a very long career in journalism, in social agitation, in philosophy. And it's always a pleasure to see him, to learn from him, to converse with Hugo. Welcome to Spain. Welcome
Thank you.
to Aspen again.
Gracias.
He has joined us with our Young Politicians program before. So it's wonderful. And then Judy Samuelson, who is the director of Aspen US Business Society program, also an activist, a thinker, a writer. She has come with gifts. Beware of American bearing gifts. So thank you so much for your book. Those of you who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And I've promised to Judy that one day we'll translate it into Spanish.
But he also told me you guys all speak English perfectly, so it's not necessary.
The idea is to have a conversation to continue the very important themes that we have addressed today. So from climate emergency and energy transition to the role of business, technology, to geopolitics, to how do we think globally, but then act in an effective way inside organizations and also contributing to society to tackle these problems about the long-term health of our society and of our planet. I will start with Judy, since we have been reading her along Milton Friedman and Michael Sandel. Your mission as an organization is to align business decisions with the long-term health of society. I love that way of putting it. But can you share a bit more about this particular vision for business and why corporations should be interested in following this approach?
Well, why not, right? Thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I can't tell you how happy my husband and I are to be out of the United States for a couple weeks. Let me just put it that way. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to continuing the conversation wherever this goes. But yeah, corporations, they're the most important or influential institutions of our age. That's not a value judgment. It doesn't mean they're the best or the worst. They're just deeply influential. And we, as I think you guys were saying today, you understand that you can't solve these problems without business at the table. It simply has to be part of the mix. And so our work is very much about trying to step back and say, kind of institutionally, what needs to be true to really capture the extraordinary capacity, talent, global reach, distribution systems, all of these things that we need to apply, but not just with the framework of what's in the financial health of the institution, but how do we get past these barriers between what works for the company and the investors and really capture it in a way that is more kind of instrumental in terms of the health of society. And that does require long-term thinking. So I guess I'd stop there. But, we say that business it's kind of like the church in the Middle Ages. It really is a very dominant institution. And this is where I have to stop back and say, I'm speaking from the United States. I'm not trying to make a comment. I don't know Spanish corporations. I know a little bit about Tony's work, but that's about it. And so we're in a world of hurt in the United States. Things are out of balance. And we need business at the table to help right the ship.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the role of Tony, as a pioneer, as trying to lead the responsible business function at VVA, what are the challenges you have had, the most relevant lessons learned in the journey, towards a purpose-driven bank.
Yeah, no, great pleasure to be here, and great opportunity to meet again with Judy, and great with Hugo. It's a great honor to be here. And well, I have had a very good, I think we have had very good sessions today. I have learned a lot, by the way. So I think the session, we have had very good questions. Yes, our journey in a bank, it's a massive transformation. And I think that if you read the book, the 6 rules, I try to apply these 6 rules in the journey that we are living, in this case at BBVA. You know? First, the importance of this massive and transformational purpose. So I remember perfectly well when Carlos Torres, our chairman, was appointed as a CEO in 2015. The first thing that he did was to challenge the whole organization to define why we exist. No? And we opened a Google community with 40,000 employees participating during 2 months, answering this question. No? And he did that, challenging us with that famous video, the why, the what, and how. And that was a good example of how we discover, no? our purpose, no? Which is to bring the edge opportunity to everyone. So I think this is a first message that we would like to share, the importance of the purpose in order to energize, to align energy, and then connect it with the values and with the culture. No? We have 3 values. I love especially one of them, which is within big. We want to challenge the system. We want to think outside the box. We want to have huge impact, positive impact in people's lives. So that message it's energized a lot, especially for people that, or a team that, as the team I lead, that our challenge in a certain way is to be the guardians of the purpose, no? As our CEO defines our role. So, but well, the journey is large. It's important to have a strategy. For us, I think that sustainability and climate is not only a compliance issue, it's the best business decision we may take to embed sustainability in our business strategy. It's important to have KPIs. It's important to have linked these KPIs into compensation in order to provide the right incentives. It's important also to have intentionality with the impact, to use the SEC frameworks, not as a nice framework to report, but as an input in your strategy to see where you can contribute the most. So there are a lot of lessons learned. If you follow the 6 rules, at the end we arrive to the 6 rules in a certain way, no? And it's a long journey, but I'm very proud of to be working in a bank. I would say that, as I like the Otto Scharmer sentence that they said, we have to work not only at BBVA, but from BBVA. So I would say that 50% of my time is dedicated to mobilize others for this systemic change that we need, no? And this is part of the journey for a responsible bank, to be active on the systemic change. No?
Thank you, Tony. And Hugo, you have said, in your writings, in some of your talks, that we need to put meaningfulness at the heart of our culture. You have sometimes even criticized the word sustainability because it's not clear what it means, but meaningfulness, what benefit would that have?
Well, I think that what Tony and Judy have spoken about is, in a way, meaningfulness in business. Purpose is very much connected to meaningfulness, but it's only one aspect of and predominant business culture, I think, and certainly the sort of Milton Friedman culture that you only have to worry about shareholders and maximizing profit. Or maximizing shareholder value it sort of detracts really from the idea of business purpose. But this is only one aspect of purpose, and the dominant culture in business is only one aspect of how purpose has actually been, or meaning has been, sucked out of our culture. I mean, you can talk about economics more generally. Economics, the idea is that, more or less, the predominant idea is that we need to maximize utility, which is more or less the balance of pleasure over pain, and that the way to do that is by getting rich. So there you have, right at the heart of the sort of economics profession, which then filters down through politics. But also, the idea of what is a good life is very much associated with happiness, which is also very much a sort of passive. It's sort of the modern view is it's about feeling good, whereas if you go back to the ancients, say Aristotle or whatever, I mean, it was his term was eudaimonia. which is an idea with not just feeling good, but doing good. And so there was this linkage between feeling and doing, which we sort of slightly lost. But I bring this also back to what's going on with climate change and in our culture, again, the Anthropocene is sometimes called, is that we've viewed ourselves as being, unlike all other animals who are living with their habitat, we consider ourselves to be above our environment, separate from it, and have the right to exploit it for our benefit and our benefit alone. But in the process, in the name of getting rich, what we're doing is we are actually destroying our home. So I think that so I see this need for meaningfulness coming in all different ways. And although we have multiple crises at the moment, Ukraine, climate, pandemic, globalization, mental illness, actually underlying a lot of them is a deep cultural crisis. And a big element of that is that we no longer put meaningfulness at the center of our culture.
Thank you. Judy, how should we be thinking about the role of business in this transition, in this reform of capitalism, in trying to really make change happen, to take care of the planet, to create a more humane society? Sometimes business seems to be the problem, sometimes it's part of the solution. What needs to be true to assure the latter?
So, muy complicado. Benjamin Franklin was known to have said that it's about 1% innovation and 99% execution, getting the job done. And when I hear Tony talk about purpose, I write a lot about purpose. We worked for 10 years to disrupt the Milton Friedman-esque narrative in the United States. And we've come a long ways. We've had an impact on the narrative. But the question I'm most, I'm asked a lot, and I don't know, I was trying to scan through the excerpt in Spanish to try to say, wait, what chapter are they reading here? So I think it was partly in there, but, the idea that the Business Roundtable, which is a very influential organization in the United States, it represents, the 200 of the largest, biggest brands, tends to be both B2B and B2C corporations. They're holding back. We're not truly seeing the kind of breakthroughs that we need to address climate. We're not, inequality is winning. We're not seeing the kind of stepping back that I think we're going to need to really move the needle. And so it's very much, I think, about a leadership moment. And will the next generation, will the generation of executives that are moving into business, will they actually have a different idea? Will they be able to break down these kind of barriers between a business that's fundamentally designed for and is tethered to the stock price? Because that is the design of most public companies in the United States. That, of course, leaves a vast array of corporations that are not public, but our focus has been on the public corporations because it's so much a part of the noise and the narrative. And the definitions, as I write a lot, purpose is revealed. So back to the Business Roundtable, the question I'm asked most often is it true? Is the Business Roundtable, in fact, are the members of these large corporations, are they doing what they said that they would do? And I'd have to say right now, the jury's kind of out. Some are, some are not. But it's a vast, complex array of things that need to be integrated. And so one of the questions that, that's kind of on the table here is when we're talking about sustainability, what does that mean? So let me just end this little soliloquy with, something that popped up this morning. Elon Musk can't stay out of the news to, save himself. I think he likes being in the news, of course. But, there's this moment right now where we're talking about Tesla all the time, it seems. And, and this man who is somehow embodies the corporation at the same time as it has its own purpose. And some regulator, maybe you remember who it was, Tony, somebody's pulled Tesla out of the kind of sustainability metrics and said, you guys are not cutting it.
S&P.
It was the S&P. So a piece of me says, that's ridiculous, right? This corporation is designed for remarkable breakthrough innovation. It, in fact, gives me a huge amount of hope when I think about that kind of innovation and that kind of market power and that kind of demand and that kind of consumer the consumer is leaning in on this. And yet, known to be a rapacious, employer, fighting government, not willing to work with government, not a taxpayer. Where do we balance these things out? And how do we measure the worth of a corporation in any kind of meaningful way? We're in a moment where the metrics are about rewarding and punishing, not about really diagnosing and analyzing what needs to happen to change. And so I think it's incredibly complicated, but I come back to the belief that there are some forces in play. And I will end by saying I think that the biggest news for me continues to be the importance of employees themselves today. That we are truly seeing a renaissance in terms of employee voice, and because of the power of social media and its, the employees' willingness to engage first, as anonymous players, but then in coalitions and collaborations, I think we're starting to see some real internal accountability in a way in which investors are actually not bringing about a lot of accountability, are very much focused on short term. Tony and I can have a debate about that. And consumers are by and large worthless. Employees, on the other hand, are very aligned with the company. And they see some of the same things and are a good bridge to action. So that's where I feel encouraged. And then, of course, I believe in a lot of these leaders who are really trying to do things differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of them is Tony, so I would like to ask you a very practical case. In Judy's book, one of the things she proposes is to shift from compete to win to co-create to win. And you're living from within a transformational process in the financial sector, in the commitment to a net zero world. This Glasgow Alliance for Net Zero. And I would like to ask you for your experience trying to move forward, and what would it mean for the whole financial system if that concrete project succeeded?
No, fantastic. No. Well, I'm going to speak thanks to the privileged position that I have the honor to have in UNEP-FI, because UNEP-FI is a partnership between the United Nations Environmental Programme and financial institutions. It's a partnership that was launched practically 30 years ago. Well, this year we have the 30th anniversary, and it's a partnership with around 450 financial institutions, including banks, insurers, and investors from all continents. And I have the privilege to co-chair a steering committee, representing the European banks. And we have seen this movement, And I remember that in the conversations that we have had today, we have discussed about the different signals, the different stakeholders are doing, and the COP rituals, and how the financial system is moving, And this idea of the systemic change and the coalition for the change, I think it's incredibly important for the financial system, Let's think that at the end of the day, we are going to have the biggest business disruption of our time due to the climate change in the next 20, 30 years, There are a lot of different estimations, but the last one from McKinsey is around $275 billion of investment till 2050, practically 8% of GDP, year after year, year after year. So there will be a massive capital reallocation, and financial system is critical to make this in an orderly way, because, believe it or not, the transition will happen, orderly or disorderly, taking into account the most vulnerable people or not, but transition will happen. And the financial system has a role to play on that transition. And it's good to see how the transition can help the whole economy to transition, not only those activities that are sustainable, but the whole economy, and also, obviously, trying to leave no one behind. No? So this is something that was there, and thanks that in the position at UNEPA 5, we have been working in different coalitions in the last 3-4 years. So we have an exponential momentum on collaboration. I have never seen before in my 15 years in the banking, and obviously all other colleagues that are working in the bank, this kind of complicity between banks and institutions, to understand that this is a huge problem that we have to solve all together in a certain way, no? Because the race to zero is going to be win when the first arrive. We are going to succeed when the last arrive. So we need everyone on board, no? And that's the reason why we start with the Principles for Responsible Banking 3 years ago, and it was very impressive that 1 year ago, some banks, we had some ambition to say, okay, we are going to line our portfolios and some investors with the Paris Agreement, which means to become net zero by 2070, let's say. But in the last year, 1 year and a half ago, there was a lot of pressure from the COP26 that they did a great job, Nigel Topping and also Mark Carney, who is a UN Special Envoy and was the chair of the Financial Stability Board, putting pressure to have more companies, financial institutions, to commit net zero by 2050, which is the most ambitious scenario within the Paris Agreement. No? And we were only a few banks in the beginning, no? Trying to say, well, it's very challenging because maybe in Europe we are ready to go because regulation will help us. But if you have footprint in Mexico, Turkey, other countries, even Turkey, they were out of the Paris Agreement. Now they have come back. So it was very challenging, no? But more and more banks start to join this movement, and we create these G funds, Glasgow Finance Lines for Net Zero, that now we have 450, again, financial institutions, 100 banks, 40% of the banking system committed with net zero 2050. It is true, it's 2050, but it's 40%. So you have the inflection, you have a right to the tipping point to create this systemic change. So I think that's important. It was also a clear message to governments in Glasgow to say, hey guys, the financial system is ready to go. So there's not an excuse that the money is not there. The money is ready to invest in the activities in the transition. So now it's time, obviously, to play the work by the governments, by clients, by society. So each one has to play the role. And now the challenge for institutions is that this commitment to long-term, as somebody, I think, commented this morning, is like the Science-Based Target Initiative. So you have to have specific targets by 2030 or 2025 per sector. You have to include these targets into your asset allocation, into your risk management. You have to disclose the performance of these targets. So it's not only a big campaign. It's something that's going to be very concrete. Later we can comment probably in some examples, no? But this is really going to transform the financial system. It will take time because we need time. But we are creating the baseline collectively to provoke this systemic change that we need. I will finish saying that without any doubt, we are going fast, we are moving fast towards an inevitable systemic change in the financial system. No? It is clear that will happen.
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. Hugo, we read your very interesting piece written for Reuters on the Marshall Green Plan. Mm-hmm. But you've said that the Ukraine crisis is just one of several crises that are colliding at more or less the same time. Does this mean that the next generation will inevitably inherit a dystopia?
I prefer, if possible, actually to comment a little bit about what Judy and Tony said, if just to stick with this theme of what business and finance can do, if that's okay. Just because I think I think there are things that business and finance can do, and I completely agree with Judy that they are really important institutions and they have great capacity for initiative. But we also must be realistic about what business and finance can do. And you say, and it's great. I mean, I know Mark and Nigel very well. I've worked with them in the run-up to COP, etc. And the GFANs, this 40% but the 60%
Yeah,
who are
you're
not
right. You are right.
involved. And you say it's a tipping point. It's sort of a tipping point, and it's sort of not a tipping point. And Judy talks about the leadership in the public companies, but we don't look so much about maybe the private companies. And there's been say oil and gas companies. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them to disinvest. But that doesn't mean that these assets are being closed down. They're being sold off normally to private companies that are, or to semi-state companies in the Middle East or Russia or wherever else, where there's even less transparency, less pressure, and sometimes these, and they actually operate these assets often in a dirtier way.
Yep.
So actually they pollute more. So we must be realistic about this, and more or less you can view this within the context of what economists call the free rider problem, which is that it's very difficult to get the whole system to move if people can get a free ride, or companies can get a free ride on the good efforts of others. And the problem is that if enough companies or individuals take that attitude, even the incentive for those who want to do good things doesn't happen. And so this is why, yes, I completely think that the cultural changes that Judy and Tony are helping to create is important, but also what Mark Carney said, the GFAN said, which was, now it's up for the governments.
Yes.
But with the governments, we also have a problem, because each government thinks, well, if I take a lot of action, I will help save the world, but I will put a huge cost on my people. And so we need to get this sense of cooperation going. And the problem about all of these crises that we're talking about in the world is that actually they're making it harder at the moment for there to be cooperation. Now, there is still a little thin line. For example, Britain left the EU. This is not the biggest type of conflict in the world, but we are sort of just about hanging on there, working on climate together. And there's just, while, the new Cold War that we might have, which won't really be between the West and Russia, it'll be between the West and China, for the time being, we're just about hanging on, talking to the Chinese about how we can work together. But only just, and very, very, very sub-optimally. And so I think we need, and I think that therefore, as this is why I actually see, you said, what all these different crises that are colliding at the same time. I mean, there are lots and lots of feedback loops. For example, the conflict in Ukraine is causing a big cost of living crisis. People in the global south will be really, really badly hit, but in our part of the world, we will also be somewhat hit. And that is, in my view, likely to fuel nationalistic populism. I mean, I think that, if the French election had happened 6 months later, I'm not sure Macron would have necessarily won. And the problem with populism, again, particularly nationalistic populism, it makes it much, much harder for countries to come together to solve common problems. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I think when you discussed my article this morning, some people thought I was being too optimistic or too idealistic. I think we need to have a realistic view of actually what the different agents can do. And I also, just picking up something that Judy said, I mean, how much we can actually change the profit motive that infuses the world of business and finance. I think we can move it, a few degrees, but we're not going to change it, certainly not in my lifetime, those of us who are the older age. But we can change it a bit. But what we also must do is we must harness this desire, this competitive desire, the desire to win or the desire to make money. We've got to harness, and that's actually, I think, what's good about Elon Musk is that he shows that, my God, you can actually, without making any profit, you can be worth fortune. And so we're using the greed, in a way, the greed of the markets, the greed, the want to be a winner, to invest in these new technologies. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we have to be realistic, and we have to use the tools that are out there.
Could I respond to
Absolutely.
something? We want to open it up too, I know, but we could just talk amongst ourselves here. You know, business's role is really complicated here. We need business to get policy. Again, let me speak from the United States. Business ducked when it came time to get a price on carbon. You know, it was all part of our infrastructure bill, and business leaned in and essentially said, not if it means higher taxes. So, and we could let's put that issue aside, whether they were right or wrong about the taxes and all that. We could have a longer conversation about that. But they ducked on putting their weight in Washington behind a climate bill. And we suffer for it. On the other hand, we have brilliant examples, and we don't want business, you know, money in politics is very much part of the problem in the United States. So the influence of business in the wrong ways in Washington is part of the kind of cleanup here that's required. But in some respects, it's ironic that the brands are the most important at the table because they're the ones who are most at risk. And so what you see, if you kind of get inside these institutional players like Tony is talking about, these coalition building, the way that comes about is because the ones with the biggest brands, they stand up and say, we're the ones that are taking the heat here. We're raising the bar on our industry. And we can examine how this happens, whether we're talking about preserving, you know, fisheries. It's the brand. It's McDonald's that gets yanked by Oxfam. McDonald's turns to the biggest producer and says, I need you at the table. The biggest producer has no choice. The biggest producer stands up and says, I hear you. Assembles the table where all of those B2B players that we couldn't even name have to come to the table because that biggest producer has enough weight to start influencing the actual protocols of a system. That's what is starting to happen. And it's the NGOs. I know a number of you work for non-governmental organizations. Incredibly important role that they're playing. When I say consumers are useless, there is that role that they play in kind of listening to the noise about a McDonald's or about a BBVA or a Citibank or whoever it is that's being pulled today. But when you look at what these guys end up doing, it's not the biggest brands who are the biggest problem. They're exposed. It's this whole underbelly of players who only are responding to profit. And it's a much more complex domain when we're talking about institutional moves. And I think that's one, it's utilitarian. It's not, you know, we're doing this for the, you know, I don't care what the reason is. What I care is the design of the system, and is the design of the corporation itself correct to the need for being able to capture that institution to drive change? How will the change take place? I'm obsessed with that question.
Tony, please.
Coming back to points, Hugo, that's true that we have to be pragmatic and realistic that the challenge is so huge. But as you said, I think that this is like a big transatlantic. If you only turn right only 2 degrees, maybe it's only 2 degrees, but in a few miles, the movement will be, the difference in the final movement will be very relevant. No? So a cumulative change, step by step, can really change completely the path, no? Of the economy, of the system, of the sectors. And absolutely true that we depend on the success of the regulation. We need a smart regulation, a smart taxation, to show the clear pathways that we need in different sectors to help all players to have certainty about what is good, what will be bad, and then provide financing. But we need those to be played. So governments play absolutely key role, and our clients at the end of the day. Our success depends on our client's success. As Ray Kroc from McDonald's used to say, we succeed when I help our clients succeed, no? And that's the for financial institutions, this is absolutely critical. No? So I think that's the approach that I think the financial system in general have. But obviously, it's a systemic change. We need all stakeholders playing their part. And what I see, what really works, is these feedback loops, providing signals from one stakeholder to another one, raising the bar. No? And this is what is happening. Some watchers asking more, standard setters asking more, financial institutions, companies, then governments. This morning somebody said, it helps me a lot to see that society asks this or asks that, or companies do this or do that. It helps a lot to the supervisors see that banks are worried about climate change because they say, oh, that's important. Why don't we work together to develop a new standard for that? So I think these feedback loops is absolutely critical to create the momentum, no, of this huge systemic change that we need. No, sorry.
I agree with that. I think that this point of, both Judy and Tony have been talking in a way about feedback loops, and I think that particularly this connection between business, individual actions by individual businesses, which can be inspiring, but how they then change business culture more generally, and how that then prepares the ground that allows the politicians then to move in with regulation or tax. It's a great shame what happened with the carbon tax in America, because the oil and gas industry killed it, and how they've come round to saying, actually, we think it's a rather good thing, but Congress is not in the state for doing that. So I think that, and I'm a little bit more optimistic about consumers than Judy. I think
really?
that I think every stakeholder has its role to play, and I think that they're untapped. But particularly with climate change, what we need to do is consumers don't really have the information at the moment, or very little information. And what you need to do is you need to go down through increasingly we're going through the supply chain, and we're getting more and more data. Not just about carbon, but about, is there child labor in the supply chain or whatever it is. We should at some point be able to get to a situation where, you go into a supermarket, you can find how many calories in what you're buying. At some point, you should be able to find, well, what is actually the carbon content, the full carbon content.
We just have to do it through price. Consumers love price. They're bound by price and convenience. We know this.
Well, this is true of some.
Amazon.
This is true of some, but that's not true of it. And again, just as there has been a sort of the shock troops in finance and the shock troops in business, there will be the shock troops in among consumers who are prepared who feel about these things, and also in employees. I do think that there is a role for all of the stakeholders to play, but I think. And this will gradually drive things too slowly, too slowly, much too slowly.
What is clear is that practically 30% of
I'm saying much too slowly.
Too slowly. Practically 30% of the reduction of CO2 emissions depends on the behavioral change at the consumer level.
Price. We got to get it priced.
If I may, let me open the floor to the rest of participants in this conversation.
Oh, they get to talk too? Okay.
They get to ask questions, so hopefully, at the end of whatever you ask, there will be a question mark. But please,
Doesn't have to. As far as I'm concerned, comments are welcome.
Angel,
I don't think you should undermine our moderator.
Sorry. Sorry.
So Angel, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah. I work at sustainability area at Endesa, which is one of the biggest utilities in Spain. I'm part of an L group, which is also one of the biggest utilities in Europe. So I just wanted to give you, you were saying, no, they are going to ask, but actually is to support you, because I think that one thing that we are very much concerned is this thing about customers. And I think that at least in our experience, what we see is that B2B maybe working big companies requiring, their suppliers to fulfill sustainability requirements and be very careful about that. But our experience is that specifically in some areas, for instance, when we are operating in different markets, it's not the same, the north of Europe than the south of Europe. In our experience, it's price, what is moving right now the customer. So sustainability, actually we were talking about this double moral kind of surveys. I always remember the survey that an association here, Forética, did some time ago. And it was asking something that this morning I think we talked about that. They were asking people, you are recycling things? And people were saying, of course, I recycle. And they were asking, you think your, people at your side is recycling? And they were saying, no, they're not. So if you are asking me, I'm not going to say that I'm not recycling because, I'm not going to be good. But actually, when I'm telling you what the others are doing, I'm really projecting what I really do. So our experience when we've done surveys to see what is moving the domestic customer is that right now still a lot of education and also information that customers don't have to take the decisions need to be given so that they are really going to opt for the product that is considering sustainable issues and climate change fighting and so on. And mainly, the rest is going to be considering price.
Don't you think so?
Price.
Sorry.
Get it priced. Get it cost. Push the cost out. I think the system is not designed to get the results we need. I'm not saying that's true in every country. There are obviously countries that are figuring out the recycling business. But, we're not paying, in the United States, we're clearly not paying the real cost of operation. So you take something like recycling, there's no demand for the product that's being recycled. I mean, the global ramifications of that are complicated enough, but we simply have to, we have to push it down. The corporations have to realize the real price, and they're going to have to be able to push that down, or we're not going to get that big systems push. But right now, our narrative is that it's a win-win world. Doing well by doing good, business, sustainability, it's all good for business. It's not. It's not good. These are real costs that have to be borne, whether it's about the costs in terms of growing inequality by putting the stock market as a measure of success, or if we're talking about carbon. Any of these things, these big systems, this is not a win-win world. There are winners and losers now, and we are going to need to recalibrate, and we're going to need some real system plays in order for those costs to be borne and pushed down to actually change behavior. That's my take on it.
Just to complement, I mean, first, very obvious, but the first idea is education. So I am very optimistic about the new generations that are coming. That really, I think that they are coming in with a new mindset, a new approach to this. And so education is absolutely critical. Secondly, invest in innovation. I think companies, we have to innovate more and more and more to get the economics of all products and solutions and services that decide for a sustainability solution will be the smartest one. We have already some problems that are already solved technologically at a larger scale that have cost sense in terms of renewable or electric vehicles already now, but in 2 years' time, 3 years' time will be even better. But there are other activities, other services that are really not there, no? And we need to invest and rethink how we can do things in order to create incentives, no? And I will finish with incentives. I think we have to rethink how we create incentives at a larger scale, no? Obviously, the carbon price, it's the mechanism. We are totally supportive of the carbon price, carbon mechanism. There are different ways, different approaches, but at the end of the day, if you don't put price intersectionality, it's very difficult to promote this behavioral change. So we need a smart taxation, a smart green taxation, probably neutral, but obviously who pollute must pay, and then have some resources to incentivize certain behavioral change, and also for those vulnerable people that are suffering most in this transition. So I think that we have to combine education, innovation in order to make products and services in a different way in order to reach the market and create the right incentives to change, and incentives at a larger scale to promote the change that we need. Otherwise, we are not going to move the needle.
I mean, I think I agree with Tony that there are multiple things we need to do, and also the questioner from Endesa, I'm afraid I didn't get your name, but yes, information, yes, education, yes, innovation, and then price is important too. But price there are lots of different aspects to price. I mean, there is indeed carbon price. That's a very important part. But let's be realistic. It's something like the fully distributed price of carbon, I think, at the moment around the world is about $4 a ton. And all economists think that you need $100 or something like $100 a ton. So we've got 4% of the way there. And there are various ideas that, such as a carbon club, which is was talked about by that Nobel Prize winner Nordhaus, but it's now being picked up by the Germans, who are trying to extend their carbon tariff, the European carbon tariff idea, which is still only an idea. It hasn't yet become a reality.
There is a proposal.
There is a proposal, but it's
it's
not yet there. It's not there. Yeah, but the Germans want to extend it and make it more global. Okay, so this is one part of price, but there are other types of price. One is indeed innovation drives down cost, even if the full cost is not actually there in the price. If the cost of renewable energy comes down below the cost of oil and gas, even without taking into account the carbon price, that will drive change. And then there are other considerations that affect the price that consumers pay and the cost that is for example, the Ukraine war. And what we saw, was it 2 days ago, that the European Commission has come up with this latest iteration of their plan to wean Europe off Russian oil and gas. And I think they're planning to spend something like 250 billion euros over the next few years in order to drive that change. That's a lot of money that's coming there. Why is it coming there? It's not coming there because of climate. It's coming there because of geopolitical reasons, because of security reasons. And so when Judy says we just have to concern about cost, there are actually other things that feed into many agents' views. And I would just want to mention, I mean, the idea that I've been pushing for the last year is this clean green plan. And this is an idea that the G7 specifically should help the global south go green fast. And they should do this by using relatively small amounts of public money to unleash the 100 trillion plus of private money that you and GFANS and Carney and Topping, etc., have been lining up. But it's not, none of that, or almost none of that, is actually flowing to developing and emerging countries. So you've got to somehow change the attitude of the governments to help that flow. And the argument that I've used is that this is not just a climate thing. This is a geostrategic initiative. And this is, and why? I mean, first of all, because I believe it is a geostrategic initiative, and that otherwise China has been pulling a lot of these emerging markets and developing countries into its sphere of influence through its so-called Belt and Road Initiative. But apart from that, it's actually, the reason I've stressed this is because I think that if you want to change the views of political leaders, climate change often seems just a bit too far away. But oh my God, we've got a geostrategic problem, and particularly now, it's very much, it's not just 10 years down the road, it's, well, Russia's come back, and we can see that China has been sort of supporting Russia, not too much, but, they've certainly not condemned it, and they've been somewhat shielding it, and they had that summit just before the invasion, where they said that their friendship knew no bounds. Okay, this may be partly rhetoric, but all of these things come into the mix. And so I think we need to use this is a system, but we need to come, because it's a system, you need to enter the system from multiple points, and push wherever you can, and then you can get, hopefully, the virtuous circle rather than this vicious cycle.
Thank you. Hugo. Natalia, please.
Hello, thank you very much for this panel today. Well, I'm Natalia. I'm co-founder of a startup, social startup, where we help local farmers and organic farmers to be more efficient and to be able to reach a very complicated market with technology. So my question goes to Judy. When I read your piece, it was like a breath of fresh air for me, because it's something I've been fighting for many months now. So I see that there is a lot of young entrepreneurs, leaders, most of them below 35, that have very innovative ideas that can help in many, many ways to solve part of the problem of climate change, biodiversity, all that. However, whenever they build their company, they have big problems getting investment, because their solutions are solutions that take time. They require systemic changes. They require grassroots transformative changes that it takes time. That is the way it is. But investors are asking for fast returns, like short-term returns. And this is something that I see that is stopping many really interesting developments and innovations to flourish. So it's just a hard question, probably. Like, what do we do to convince them or to show all these investors, the funds, VCs, all that systemic changes take time, and that we need this time to develop our innovations?
So this is where it all comes together, right? You know, young, entrepreneurial-minded people who care about the food system, who are making kinds of connections. They can do things locally. How does that advance at a level of systems change? And in the United States, how do we get them to show up at the ballot box and vote their beliefs? You know, one of the biggest problems they're facing at the midterm elections is whether or not young people are going to turn up to vote. They're so disillusioned by the political environment. And so this isn't much of a business story here. I feel like it's a story about the health of our politic. You know, it's the health of, I can bring anything back to business, and I'm going to, because I feel like part of the question right now when it comes to business, yes, there's powerful stories about, you know, I write about Pepsi. You know, Pepsi touches, I don't know, 10, 20,000 potato farmers. So when they change something in their protocols that makes sense in terms of water use or use of pesticides, or I don't know anything about growing potatoes, but you know, they tweak something a little bit, and it's what Tony's talking about. That reverberates throughout a system. It's not going to get to the point that these ventures would like to see, but it's kind of, you know, we're starting to see some of that come back. And then it comes back to public policy. And are public policy going to actually become future-oriented and not become nationalistic? You know, is it going to kind of lean into the reality of who we are as a people? And, you know, business has got to put the health of democracy back at the center. You know, it's back to this question of who's winning and who's losing, and how do we build a system that actually is willing to support the kind of germination of a healthy system. Help me here. I don't.
Tony, you
No,
want to
the experience that we have. We are a bank that our activity is to provide loans. Okay, not in general. We don't invest in equity, and that's our focus. But we start to see obviously more and more funds, venture capital on these breakthrough initiatives, no? Because we need to invest in equity, in higher risk solutions, and I would say that the key point is probably is significantly more difficult to convince a standard investor or venture fund of the goodness of investing in projects like yours, than to have to focus on those investors that are really prepared with this No, but they are growing. It's a growing trend. We, for instance, in our case, we have already invested in, for instance, we don't invest in specific startups, but we invest in funds that they invest in the startups. We prefer to diversify, and we want to learn a little bit about that because it's not we are not very used to do it. But now, for instance, we have invested $20 million in lower carbon fund, which is a fund focused on different startups on different technologies to carbon capture and carbon storage and so on. And well, we are not going to provide them any lending at all, but through equity can be interesting. So these type of funds are growing and growing, more in US than in Europe, as usual. But I would say that is something that is starting to see, we have started to see in the market some appetite on that. And it's good to see. Well, the Breakthroughs Energy initiative from Bill Gates is probably the most well-known and more recognized on this field, no? But there are a lot of different funds that are working on that, on hydrogen and all these kind of technologies, and obviously in agribusiness as well.
Hugo, you've been an entrepreneur yourself all your life.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I think, what Natalia's pointing to is a real problem. Mm-hmm. As Tony says, the ecosystem of venture capital, development capital, passing it on to the public markets is a very developed one. Europe, we have much less of that. Often companies, when they are looking for the next level in their development, they either sell themselves to a larger company, or if they manage to do it, they float themselves on NASDAQ in America. So in Europe, we have a problem. We also, throughout the world, there's also a big imbalance between equity capital and debt capital, because more or less, there's a big tax incentive for using debt versus equity, but it's the small startups that need the equity. So the system is basically distorted. But still, we have to make progress with what we've got. And the best thing that we've got is that this type of investment, this type of industry can be exciting. And investors, if they feel that they've got a pathway to, maybe they don't have to see it all the way through to the big profit, but if they can create something and then they can sell it on, say, the venture capitalists, and then they can sell it on to some private equity who then float it on the stock market. This can be very powerful. I saw this, as Jose said, I created my own .com about just over 20 years ago. And I was very fortunate, but I had connections, but I was a financial journalist, and I was able to raise quite a bit of money. We didn't actually provide anyone a profit until we sold it. A few years we were profitable, but each time we got profitable, we decided we're going to expand. So first of all, we expanded into continental Europe, and then into America, and then into Asia, and then we sold it. So actually there was no dividend for any shareholders in those 10 years, but the investors did ultimately make a profit. And so, but I think clean tech, for example, is it's going to be one of the big winners. Not every company is going to be a win, but I think that sometime that enthusiasm will get there, and at least in some cases the money will flow. But certainly at the government level and at industry level and at financial level, we need to also create the ecosystem that allows that to happen.
Gonzalo wants to jump in.
Can I just say quickly, though, that the venture capital system is horribly broken. The venture capital system is not understanding that there's value to be created. They're not going to be able to optimize to a price and return. We have to open this up. We have to open up the potential of investment, not be running by the rules of venture capital, which assumes you can get X, Y, Z, or otherwise it's charity. There's a whole lot of things to invest in between. Sorry.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And the venture capital industry is based on the assumption that that you end up in the stock market, because it's the end game. Now we start talking about permanent capital, which is a different type of capital. But anyway, I was going to ask, because Judy, I really love when I hear public policy is very important, because at the end of the day, it's what really forces things to change. And the question for you would be, if you had the chance to ask for two pieces of public policy in the coming years, taking into account that two pieces of public policies are not going to make are not going to be the whole solution to this complex problem. But if you're going to ask for two pieces of public policies to start moving the needle, which would those be?
Sorry, I need three. Can I have three?
Okay, three.
This is the United States. Things are complicated.
Three.
Price on carbon. Connected to that. We have to get money out of politics. You said I could just ask whatever I want, right? This doesn't have to be realistic. We got to get the money out of politics. So we're not buying policy. We're letting the people decide the policy. Price on carbon. And as long as I get to ask, let's get rid of the guns. Get rid of guns.
Okay.
Just, yay. Thank you for the opportunity to engage in fantasy.
Hugo and Tony, you also have three wishes.
Okay, well, I'm gonna second Judy's price on carbon. But then the question is, what do you do when some countries impose a carbon tax and other countries don't? And so this is why you need this is why this idea that the Europeans and the Germans have now come up with is the carbon border tax has come up. And the problem, I mean, this is a good idea, but there are two problems with it. One is that it will penalize some of the poorest countries in the world, the developing countries, the emerging markets. And the second is that if you actually implemented it in a non-discriminatory way, you would have to impose big carbon taxes. Europe would have to impose big carbon taxes on exports from America, imports from America that come from America, because I mean, the Americans spew out a hell of a lot more carbon. Now, I'm a bit wary about that for geopolitical reasons, because if we start in Europe imposing carbon taxes on America, that will undermine the Western alliance, when for a lot of other reasons we need to bring it together. And as far as the global south is concerned, I'm very wary about hitting them with a stick until and unless we come up with a really good carrot. And that's this clean green plan that in my view, I've been talking about, which will be that. But you really have to give all of these countries a credible alternative pathway to development that is going to be green before you come along with a big stick saying, well, you're being nasty, so we're imposing tariffs on you. So I think there's a sequencing view. Carbon tax, great. If Americans can do it, amazing, because they're the big need. But we need to come, for the rest of the world, we need to come in with that carrot before we wield the stick.
Yeah, I building on your idea, Hugo, well, first, I think it's not only carbon, I would say. As I said before, we need a smart taxation. If we only implement a carbon price mechanism and it's perceived as an additional tax, as usual, because government needs money, and that's all, we are going to fail without any doubt. We are going to have problems like in France we had a few years ago, and society won't understand. That's my feeling. So I think it's good to explain that we need a neutral taxation, increasing obviously taxation through carbon, with a mechanism we can have. In US, what was proposed by Republicans and Democrats, that idea of the carbon dividend as an example. No? So there are different mechanisms that we can use. But on the other side, use that budget specifically for incentivize certain activities, or, as I said before, to cover specific needs for certain sectors, certain regions, certain vulnerable people that are going to suffer the most. No? So I think it's an issue of the narrative that the government is going to use to explain this to the society, and we need a lot of courage. I don't know if we will have it. That's by the way, no. But I think that's important, and to have this more holistic approach to the problem, no. And then secondly, going back to your point to the emerging countries, it's absolutely ridiculous. I think the major failure at the COP, we have some success in the recent COPs, but the major failure is the lack of ambition on this support, financial support from the developed countries to the emerging countries. Today in the morning we have discussed about those $100 billion that was agreed in Copenhagen. Again, in Paris, according to the OECD, we are around 80 billion, depending how we count it. We need 3 times, 4 times that, and we need a robust framework to say who pays what and for what, and who receives for what. And without this, we are not going to have ambition at the emerging countries to have NDCs at the level that we need. And I think it's very simple. I think it's something that if we don't provide that support, the emerging countries, well, India are going to be net zero 2070 in the best scenario, no? If you want to be 2050 or 2060, we need to support them more and more. And I think that's the main failure, and I hope that in Egypt, we hope that some steps will be done, and by the way, $100 billion a year, honestly, are peanuts, considering the financial system. So I think governments in developed countries should provide more, well, UK did it in COP, Spain announced also increase in this financing, also US, but not enough. We need more and more to come. No?
Thank you, and if I may jump in, I would invite you to be a bit more daring, like Judy, and also ask for a couple of public policy wishes.
Because I've got more if they don't want to use them.
Mine was to really fast forward the clean green plan. So that's my big wish. And we have one example at COP26, the South Africa Just Transition Energy Partnership. This was announced. It's only a political declaration, but the idea is that you're going to ramp up renewables in South Africa, run down the coal industry, and then help the coal miners and the other people dependent on working in the coal industry to make a just transition to new things. So it's got 3 core elements. There is now, the G7 is working on 4 more countries for this year. And if they pull them off, it'll be amazing. One is India. I don't believe it will be pulled off this year. The other is Indonesia. Pretty good. If you can't get India, not bad to get Indonesia. I think that's also going to be quite tricky. The third is Vietnam, which actually is not bad. It's quite a good one. It's again moving down in the scale. And then the fourth is Senegal. But I think we need to do 100 of these countries over the next few years. So that's if I can wave my magic wand, that's my policy.
Can I suggest one for that guy down there? How about a financial transaction tax, global?
A financial transaction tax?
Yeah. Tax financial transactions as a source of subsidy for the countries that need it the most.
Well, the externality is on the carbon, not the financial transactions, I mean. So I don't know. Okay, obviously, we can get a lot of money through this taxation, but it doesn't change the behavioral change that we want to have, taking decisions for better.
Well, the basic idea would be a fractional tax that you basically wouldn't notice if you're participating in financial markets, unless you're a massive mover.
But you don't link the tax to the problem that we have to tackle, which is reduce emissions. So you price emissions, and you put that price, then you get better behavioral change.
I totally want that too. But it could be a source of subsidy for the kind of investment that we need. It could be an important source of subsidy. And if it was done globally, across developed markets, there wouldn't be
one discussion, Judy, what discussion is open, and the ones that are working on the financial system we know quite well. Supervisors are starting to see if there is a way to add what they call penalizing factor, brown penalizing factor, or green supporting factor in capital requirements. That's something that is on the table, not clear evidence, because at the end, the idea is that any prudential treatment should be based on risk. So we have to have clear evidence that brown activities has higher risk and green activities has lower risk. No? Otherwise, we are using this measure on a not very, let's say, orthodox way.
Thank you very much. I think Paloma had a question.
Sorry.
Thank you, Paloma, for waiting.
Yes, hi, I'm standing up so that you can see me. I'm Paloma. I am currently, among other things, a professor on sustainability and social impact at EE University. We were discussing before about ESG, and I was telling Tony how my thoughts have evolved and are still evolving from loving and embracing ESG wholeheartedly to having serious questions about their validity, reliability, and even their value added. So one of the things that can be done in the future, and it's beginning to take hold, still experimentally, at least in the Harvard Business School, is impact-weighted accounts, and whether we can add or discount the value of the impact that actual goods and services that companies provide from the financial value of the company. So I wanted to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma.
Well, I know the methodology and the plan that to measure and to quantify and to in economic terms the impact. No, so in order to summarize a little bit, is something that goes beyond the double materiality of the impact assessment that we should have. No, instead of saying that we have this scope 3, scope 2, scope 1, at the end, how to translate this into economics. No, and well, we are not piloting. We know the project. I personally think that this is something that it's good to work on that and explore the possibilities to have that. I'm not so sure if that would really be mainstream, and because there are too many assumptions on the process to arrive to the final metric. No, so when we have to translate specific physical metrics or other impact metrics, social governance metrics or environmental metrics, and try to translate this into economic figure, there are too many sometimes assumptions that you have to do, and then yes, you can be comparable, but maybe it's not so close to the materiality of the activity. So I think what we see in the investors, they are not asking exactly a quantitative economic metric. I have a lot of meetings with investors, but they ask is a quality data, so data with quality of scope emissions, of diversity or whatever, which is material for your company, and comparable with others using always the same standard. It doesn't matter the translation this into economic metric. That's what I see in the market. But well, let's see. It's good to explore other ways, no?
Thank you, Salome.
Yes, my question.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, yeah, Salome Santos. I'm working in the sugar business in Azucarera in Spain. And I'm talking from the experience we are having in the sector with our customers and also with the suppliers. We have been working many years based on criteria of efficiency. That means, reducing cost because we have to deliver the product as cheap as possible to the second, to the following, the next level in the supply chain. But now suddenly we have realized because of the Ukraine, the war in Russia, that the long supply chains can be a real issue, especially when we are talking about strategic inputs or raw material for your own production process. And when we buy things, we start thinking not only on prices, but also on ensuring that you get the product, security of supply. So in a natural way, we are moving from an efficiency thinking, just in time, to a more resilient, just in case thinking, which means more expensive products for sure, but it also, it helps to the climate change thinking, because, and it's a reasoning that is coming from a business perspective. If from a regulatory perspective you encourage this type of thinking, for example, with the mirror clauses that we are talking about in Europe, I buy to countries that comply exactly with the same rules that I require my own producers. It's not protectionist, it's more trust, and same rules in the game. But it could be a change in the business thinking that could help. That's a question I ask you, whether you think that this is...
I think it's absolutely fascinating. The idea that this whole just-in-time, like who is it really benefiting? Who does efficiency benefit? In the public market sense, it's about, profit maximization, but it's about stock price. Things are closely aligned in the US model of how the capital markets work. And so I think it's fascinating to say, wait a minute, there's limits to efficiency. There's a book that Roger Martin, if you're familiar with that name, he's a scholar, was a dean, he's Canadian, he was a dean at the Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto. Sorry, Roger Martin. Yeah, it's his most recent, he's a great person for popularizing these ideas, and I think it'd be a great one to pose to him. It's like, how would that fit into that model? But I think it's a fascinating reality that all of a sudden, it's almost like we saw the limits of the system that's designed for efficiency and kind of quote-unquote productivity, and yet we know the thing is out of line. Productivity has always tracked, wages and productivity have always tracked until the 1970s, and it started to diverge, and it's still diverging in the United States. So who's benefiting? The shareholder, the ones who can pull the levers, but the system itself is not designed for long-term. So it's an example of long-term thinking.
Let me complement that, not for the Ukraine war, but linked to climate, no? How the financial system or how a bank is already introducing these different dimensions when we have to assess risk, no? Till now, we were using always a credit scoring for our corporate clients. So it depends on your credit scoring. We provide less, more, your financial program, and that's it. Now we are already, at least on the wholesale clients, we are introducing already an ESG dashboard with qualitative and quantitative information, and we have created what we call transition risk indicator, which is an indicator. So we have from 1 to 9, and a scoring of our clients. Depends on the TCFD reporting, depends on the CapEx they have in the new technologies, so depends on the resilience on the supply chain, depends on different aspects, and we define a scoring of that client. And now we have a more complex framework for decision making, no? Not only create a score, but we have also a second X, no? With a different TRI, no? And then, well, we have to assess a client, and there is not necessarily a correlation. Sometimes you have good clients in terms of credit score, but very bad position on TRI, and you have to engage with them in order to improve. Otherwise, we are going to leave them in some time. And on the other side, maybe you have very good clients with a fantastic TRI, very aligned with the new strategy and the new pathways, but not so good scoring, credit score. So the decision-making is changing, and this is sustainability at the end of the day at the core of risk management. And as a colleague in the banks used to say, if you change management, if you change risk management in a bank, you change the bank. So I think that's what's happening now.
Right.
Can I just want to say something on supply chains? And clearly there is at the moment somewhat of a retreat from globalization, and because of the need for security of supply, particularly in energy, but also in the thinking is now developing into other areas. The Americans, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, uses a term which friend-shoring. So not onshoring, not just offshoring to anybody who can produce it, but friend-shoring. So making sure that you're taking your key products from your friends. who you can rely on, one hopes, in times of trouble. Now, it seems to me that there's something in that, but at the moment it's just a slogan, really. And it's not clear, for example, that the Americans are following through. For example, in Asia, we've got, the West has got quite a lot of allies, semi-allies in Asia Pacific. And they really want to have more access to the American economy. But actually, the American administration is worried about imports from the rest of the world. And so somehow this has got to get through the approach, because ultimately, if there is a lot more that can be done to integrate the economies of friends in the world. We've just, in Britain, we've just, left the EU, so we've actually disintegrating our economy. But between America and Europe, there's a lot can be done. There's a lot that can be done between the West and Japan and Korea and Vietnam and the Philippines and Australia and even India, etc. And so we need to build on this idea. It seems to me that because there are benefits to trade, let's not forget that. But we also need security.
Do you think that the kind of repercussions of Russia and Ukraine is a moment that will take us further in this respect?
Well, I think it may. Okay? I think it may. Janet Yellen has only started talking about friendshoring in the last month, I think. She gave a speech to the Atlantic Council, which is a big American sort of foreign policy think tank, about that. But I'm not saying it will necessarily happen, because I think Biden is about to get to, to do a sort of summit with I can't remember where he's going, but somewhere in Asia to do a summit with
Korea, I think so.
Well, I don't think so, because it's the Quad. It's America, India, Japan, and Australia. They're the four big sort of. They're trying to more or less making a sort of defense foreign policy pact, but. Will there be an economic dimension to it? Well, America, as you know, moved out of the the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact. So I think this battle is yet to be engaged. But if we just disintegrate, this is not actually going to be good for the world economy. It's not going to be good for prices. It may fuel the sort of populist backlashes. There are all sorts of nasty things that can happen. We need to reshape.
Thank you, Hugo. So perhaps we should be talking about the West and the friendly rest instead of the West and the rest. So just one more question to finish. I will ask, and then I will add a final question as a moderator, but just a simple one.
First of all, thanks very much for inspiring us today, and with your article. Has been fascinating to debate about long-term and short-term and purpose, and I'm struggling how we can be authentic and how we can push for the mobilization that we need and the speed that we need and the action that we need. And I think transition is probably not contains the speed in itself. Transition is slow by definition, right? And purpose looks something static as well. I'm concerned about the storytelling on the financial system. I think we all have learned very quickly how to make it and say the same things and do the same stories and belong to the same associations and all this kind of stuff and adhere ourselves to the targets on the 50 and we're doing a lot of good things, nice things. Probably I think we are too nice. We are too, it's a bit of sugary thing. Too soft. I understand that the problem is absolutely immense, right? But we have been decades talking about mission and vision, and we have all these consultants learning ourselves, teaching ourselves how to define our mission and how we can prevent that purpose is not something that is simply a corporate bullshit, no? It's something real. Is something that, it matters, no? And how that can mobilize ourselves do more than this storytelling and doing nice things.
You forgot to introduce yourself.
I'm Vicente Cancio. I work for Zurich Insurance.
For who?
Zurich.
Zurich Insurance.
So, Zurich, I've heard of it. So when you say we, are you talking we, the corporation? Who's we?
We, the financial institutions.
No. No. I think that the only way to be credible is to show with facts and data, verify that in those targets or metrics, intermediate targets or metrics that you have put on the table are really, really achieved, and that's the only way. So let me provide you a color of what is happening already now. So for instance, in our case, other banks as well, we have already set targets by 2030 in 4 sectors: power, cement, steel, and auto. And we are going to publish targets oil and gas in September, and with the objective to cover 90% of the CO2 emissions. Today we cover 60% of the 2 emissions with these 4 sectors. And let me give you an example. In power, we have set a target that today our clients are with an intensity of around 250 grams of CO2 emissions per kilowatt produced. Our clients are there. And we want to have our clients by 2030 with 120 grams per kilowatt. So we have to help our clients to reduce by half the intensity of CO2 emissions of each kilowatt produced. And we have to report year after year how we can help them to do that. And this is an example, and this also applies to other sectors. By the way, I remember a comment of a board member just a few months ago saying, "It is incredible to see how we have learned about CO2 emissions per kilowatt produced in a bank. This is absolutely crazy, no? We spent practically 45 minutes discussing the intensity metrics of CO2 emissions. This is changing. This is a clear example that things are changing, no? So the only way is to say, okay, this reduction is in line with the science, with the net zero scenarios, and this is going to be reported year after year. And the question is, there will be clients that maybe they are aligned. That's perfect. They have to follow reducing emissions, otherwise they are going to be, in a few years, maybe above the line. So maybe we are going to have clients that are not aligned, but they are on track reducing the gap. We have to help those clients, because if they are maybe 300 grams, but they have plans to reduce in 5 years' time to 120, we have to invest. We have to invest to help them to reduce. No? Otherwise, the starting point is not so good. And maybe then we are going to have clients completely out of track and with no plans. And we are going to engage seriously with those clients, and maybe in 3 years' time, we have to leave them if they are not going to implement. But we have to take care about a responsible phase-out, what's mentioned before by Hugo, no? Saying that maybe if we are there, okay, but if we are not there and they're going to be financed by other companies or the banks or the hedge funds, we are not going to solve the problem of the world. We are going to solve our problem in our portfolio. No? So I think it's important engagement side, and by finishing metrics science-based, verified disclosure, and I think it's the only way to show credibility. No?
Thank you, Tony. This could be the beginning of a very, very interesting discussion, but we need to close. So let me just ask a final question. This seminar is about sustainability and future generations. So just if you could, each of you, speak for a couple of minutes in this difficult moment for all our societies. What lies ahead? Do you want to start?
I think this is about leadership. I think, which is why it's so important what you're doing here in Spain and what we do in the United States as your friends in the Aspen Institute in the US. I think data and facts tend to help somebody once they've already made a decision to justify it to the people that they need to bring along. I don't think of what gets us going. And I think we're in a leadership void right now when it comes to the business sector. I write about Lee Scott. I'll I'll just finish quickly with this story. Lee Scott was the CEO of Walmart in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina came and wiped out, a good part of New Orleans. And there was this photo on the front page of every paper in the United States of a line of Walmart trucks lined up on Interstate 10, which goes from California to Florida, or from Texas, Florida, California, Florida, I think, lined up waiting for the National Guard to open up the streets so that these trucks could go into the inner city and deliver blankets and water and baby formula, which I plan to buy in the stores here, by the way, and bring back to the United States and see if I can make a little money on them. We're out of infant formula in the U.S., apparently, in the supply chain problem. But he did this, and he stepped back, and he got incredible press. And it was the best press that Walmart had received in 10 years. Because there had been a 10-year campaign waged by labor unions and by environmental organizations saying, you are adrift, you're taking us down, and we don't want to go down with you. And he pivoted. He experienced that positive press and said, I need to step back and realign my company. And he did bold, incredible moves, elevating Walmart, the biggest supply chain in the planet at the time, raising the bar on sustainability internally, bringing together its own supply chain. So what I think we need now is for companies to be saying, where is the power that we uniquely have? It's not to be coming up with some placebo, purpose statement that we're all going to live by. It's saying, where do we live? What's the capacity we in particular have and could bring to the table? Where are we instrumental in systems change, like Tony is doing at BBVA by showing that leadership? That's what I'm looking for. I think this is a moment where we need business leadership to step up. And that's how real change takes place, is when somebody steps up, the business community loves to point to something like that and say, wait a minute, I can do that too.
Thank you, Tony.
Well,
What lies ahead?
totally agree. We need more leadership, more multilateralism. And, there is a book that I probably somebody you knows. It's a book written by John Elkington and Pamela Hartigan, who died a few years ago. It's called The Power of Unreasonable People. It's about social entrepreneurs, no? And I like a quote from Bernard Shaw saying that there are two types of people, no? The reasonable and the unreasonable. The reasonable simply adapt to the reality, accept the reality, and that's all. And the unreasonable are the ones that doesn't accept the reality as it is, and they pretend to transform it, no? And I think that we are all here. We are all unreasonable people, no? In the different fields, some in the corporate, some on non-GOs in the academia and other places. So I think that we have to make a call to action, no? That to be that leaders that promote change, thinking in this sense of societal and environmental impact. I used to say that when my CEO asked a few years ago, how or why do we pay you? No? And I said, you pay me basically to break comfort zones. And he said, oh, okay, that's fine. we didn't follow the discussion. But the point is, please break comfort zones in your ecosystem and speak up. And as Victor Viñuales, also a person that inspires me a lot, and is the general manager of ECODES, a very relevant foundation here in Spain, told me a few weeks ago, Tony, we have to work hard to make the unlikely possible. And well, I think it summarized quite well the challenge we have in front of us, and this is part of our responsibility.
Thank you, Tony. Hugo, you have the last word.
Oh, well, wonderful. You actually asked what lies ahead, not what we should do. And obviously, the future history isn't yet written, but when I look for the next generations, I would say that balance of probabilities before we put our agency into things and try and change it with great leadership, cooperation, etc., I don't think the outlook is good. And I think that you see, I mean, there was temperatures reached 49 degrees in India and Pakistan in April. Now we're getting some parts it's over 50 degrees, but in April, 49 degrees. There's no way that we're going to keep the global warming to 1.5 degrees. I mean, I'd love to say that, but I mean, I just don't see any way of doing that. And what that is going to do is that is going to trigger well, obviously it's going to destroy lives and livelihoods in big time in the global south, particularly Asia and Africa. But what it's also going to do is, this part of the world, it's going to trigger mass migrations. You ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to be tens of millions of people from the Indian subcontinent mainly and Africa on the move, trying in their desperation to get to cooler climates. And it's not so easy to get from there to America. So basically, there's a lot of going to be coming here in Europe. And this, I'm afraid, will trigger more bigoted, right-wing, nationalistic backlashes, which again will make it harder for us to cooperate. It's going to lead to a nastier world. I'm afraid the sort of Hobbesian world of nasty, short, and brutish is the most likely outcome. But as I say, it's not written. History is not written, and we still can't change, I don't think, the 1.5 degrees. But, 1.6 is better than 1.7. 1.7 is better than 1.8, and it's certainly better than 2.
Thank you so much. We'll continue the conversation over dinner. I think some wine will help. And thank you, Judy, Hugo.
Thanks.
You've been extraordinary. Thank you all for a great day.
Great.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much.